Day 2 in our series this week, 5 non-sales authors that you need to learn from how to act on some of the best ideas that are out there. So we're here. I think this is week 6 of the shelter-in-place order here in the Chicago area. Hope wherever you are, you're staying safe and slightly sane. I know it can be a little squirrely as we've gone through week after week of this, but stay safe. I said, stay healthy. I'm really excited about diving into day 2 here. Excuse me. We've got a little bit of a problem actually with our topic here today, because I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite authors, Malcolm Gladwell. And the problem is simply this: we could actually spend just a full week doing only Malcolm Gladwell books, and it would be time well spent. So somehow I have to get the last 20 years of Malcolm's impact on me and my career, and some of the best ideas I think can help all of us, into the next 20 minutes. So buckle up, it's going to be fun. But I'm really excited to dive into this. Again, we are doing this every day this week at 11:30. So thank you to everybody who is joining us live, and for everybody who's watching the recordings afterwards. Thanks for taking some time to watch these. We have a new topic every week. This week, again, going through some different non-sales authors that can really have an impact for salespeople and business owners. And next week we'll have a new session. All of our previous sessions from the beginning of quarantine, oh my gosh, that seemed like forever ago, are up on our YouTube channel. So be sure to take a look at those as well. We've got stuff on how to manage uncertainty and build your business in times of uncertainty, how to post on LinkedIn, how to really maximize online networking, which can be an important topic right now, how to build empathy in sales, not only for now, but obviously moving into the future as well. A lot of great stuff. So check out our YouTube channel as well. All of those recordings are there and organized into playlists. So anyways, let's dive in, because again, way too much to go through today, but we're going to try. As I said, Malcolm Gladwell is he's kind of one of my writer heroes, writer crushes. I've always been a huge fan. His book, The Tipping Point, was, I would say, kind of one of the first, nonfiction businessy kind of books that I ever read. When I first started Rockstar Consulting, actually, it was even before I started Rockstar. And what I think, even just kind of looking at this holistically, why, if you've never read a Malcolm Gladwell book, he is worth spending some time with. I think if he was not the first one, he really popularized the concept of really going into a lot of the science, especially a lot of the newer science, psychology, neurobiology, behavioral psychology, all of the new things that were really coming into play in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and really distilling it, finding the through line in a lot of the science, and making it very palatable for kind of a general audience. And if you've ever read an academic article, for example, they're not easy to get through. They're not easy to read. But he was really, obviously he's a very successful journalist before he started writing books, but he just made it really palatable and digestible. And you could really find things to do with the science, with what we were learning about how people and systems and organizations act, and then based on that, making some decisions on what we're going to do. So I'm a fanboy. I mean, just give an idea, when I wrote my first book, Networking in the 21st Century, Why Your Network Sucks and What to Do About It, I literally told the designer, the cover designer, I'm like, I kind of want to make it look like a Malcolm Gladwell book. And although I don't think we're exactly alike as far as what my covers turned out, and they're great covers, that's how much of an impact Malcolm had on me and really a lot of my early thinking. So he really, I said, kind of was one of the first people to take scientific research and really make it palatable. And I think has led the way for people like Duhigg and Epstein, David Epstein, which is a great book that just came out, Range. There's a lot of authors that do that now, but he was, I think, one of the first and still one of the best. So let's go through some lessons from all of these books really fast. Tipping Point, first one. I think it's pretty interesting that the first chapter is entitled The 3 Rules of Epidemics. So yeah, maybe pretty worth picking up right now. There's a couple things that I pulled out of this early and I think are still very relevant. The big thing was, he was really looking at what does it take for something to spread, to go viral, back when viral was just something that we wanted from our YouTube videos and our LinkedIn posts. But he came up, as he was examining what causes ideas to spread, with some great things I think we can take advantage of. And he talks about three things that were really important. One is that he calls it the law of the few. It doesn't take a lot of people to really spread an idea. He actually looks at three specific groups. He looks at mavens, who are people that know stuff. He looked at connectors, who are people that know other people. And then he looked at salespeople, who are the people that can influence others. And so for me, that really helped me understand that if I was going to build my business, for example, and try to spread my message into my network, it wasn't necessarily about connecting with just a ton of people. And especially in networking, we often think that. But rather, it was being very judicious with making sure, hey, have I met some connectors? Do I have the salespeople in my network that can sell me? Do I have mavens who are, the storehouses of information? Like, do they know that I am a resource, right? And so we can even see some of the early sales Sherpa concepts coming through. The second thing he talks about is the stickiness factor. When you're trying to share a message, is it packaged the right way? Is it packaged in a way that is simple and understandable? And can it stick in people's minds? Now, that's something that right now is very big in the marketing circles, but understand he was writing this almost 20 years ago. And so again, a very early proponent of that. So we can look at it and go, do we have a message that is sticky? If we want our message to spread, is it spreadable? And the other thing he talks about, so the third big idea, is this idea of context. So it's not just about sharing a message. It's not just about sharing a message that is sticky, but it's making sure that you have the right context to be shared. And we can definitely look at kind of what's happening with the pandemic right now. What's so scary about it, what makes it so viral, is the fact that the transmission is easy. The context is easy. All you have to do is cough around somebody and they could get it. So we can think, though, with our own ideas, what is the context with which we are sharing them? And what's interesting is he also talks for the first time about the idea of 150 people. And this is a number that comes up a lot in human relations. It's Dunbar's number, the number of human relationships we can manage at any one time, which is 148. And that's probably connected with the fact that when you get to 150 people, it gets harder beyond that to really share and spread your message. So the idea for me was like, how do I get 150 people in my network that are, again, my message is sticky, they know my message, they can help me share it. So Tipping Point, great book. Second one that came out was Blink. Blink, this is, again, something where he was very early on talking about ideas that are now kind of commonplace. But really, Blink is about the fact that we have kind of two minds. Like, how do we make decisions? And he was really talking about the conscious mind and kind of the unconscious mind. So really the idea of Blink is, how do experts and people who have a lot of information make good decisions quickly? What tools do they use? And even if, we're not an expert, we still, as we go through the world, make decisions quickly. And the reality is that we have this conscious mind, this, unconscious mind. Sometimes you might even call the unconscious mind like the reptilian brain. He actually looks at kind of the different parts of our brain, the medulla oblongata versus the cerebellum versus the cerebrum, and kind of how they do different things. The biggest thing I'm going to suggest to you, and I think that this is actually super valuable right now, we'll come back to it, is the idea that those two parts of our thinking, right? The quick, unconscious, going with our gut part, and then the more conscious, more rational, more kind of systematic way of thinking, they are both useful in different contexts. And one of the biggest challenges that we have is we use the wrong part of our brain in the wrong situation. And for example, I'll go out and say it that it terrifies me that the president has gone on national TV and gone, well, my gut says this is a good idea, when he's flanked by medical experts who are like, I don't know about that, right? There's a time to go with your gut. There is a time to think things through. And so we have to make sure that we're using the right kind of thinking at the right time. Outliers. Love this book. Just because this was a book that made me go, whoa. So Outliers, very fun stories in here. And I guess a simple way of understanding his message in Outliers is simply that context matters. We mentioned that before when we talked about the tipping point. But when we look at what makes somebody successful, and there's this story that we tell especially in the United States, American culture, that it's, the power of the individual and the power of, just, individual effort and action to be successful. What he does in Outliers is fascinating, and looking at different, sections of life and society. He goes all the way from Silicon Valley and Bill Gates and some of the early computer pioneers to Canadian hockey. And he looks and goes, oh, wait, there's actually a lot more going on than just the individual effort. Like, one of the big stories that resonates with me in Outliers is the fact that in the Canadian Hockey League, especially like for children, the cutoff date actually has a huge impact on whether somebody is a successful professional hockey athlete in Canada. Because if you're underneath, and I'm going to say this incorrectly because I'm trying to go too fast, or I'm not going to be as clear, but basically because of when you were born determines like what age group you are when you're growing up. And if you're one of the biggest people in hockey, you're going to have more success. You're going to feel more comfortable than if you're like the youngest person on the team and, you get beat up a lot and go, I don't want to do hockey. So it's just interesting that there's a broader context that we have to look at. And what this really reinforced for me is the need to really look at the entire story. I don't like the term holistic because I think it's got a lot of negative connotations. But even when we went through our series on Zen, we talked about interconnectedness. And interconnectedness, a big part of that is just understanding the context that things are happening in. And I think that this is valuable for us as salespeople, as business owners and entrepreneurs as well, because we often take on like negative stories, right? When we're feeling we're not being as successful, or we're like, hey, I'm bad. I should be doing much better. And the fact I'm not, this is stupid. And there are times that we should look critically at our success or lack thereof, and maybe get some lessons from it. But at the same time, you really have to understand that there's a lot more going on than just our own effort. And that's really kind of what helped me, because actually I kind of read it at a time where I was really struggling at Rockstar, and it's like, man, I'm doing everything wrong, and it's all on me. And again, it didn't take away my desire to work and to put effort in and to move forward. But I kind of was like, oh, wait, there's more than just, again, my own effort. And one thing too, like I think in Outliers, he talks about the 10,000 hour concept, which, you've probably heard of 10,000 hours to master a skill. And what's interesting is he's kind of wrong. And actually through all of his books, Malcolm was probably the first author who I was like, I really like this part. And this other part, I think you're wrong. I like in every book, there's definitely parts where I'm like, you're extrapolating a little too much. You're out of your wheelhouse. Maybe dial it back a bit. And I think that's important because if you really want to get a lot out of books and reading stuff and learning, what you should do is always be in dialogue with the author, right? You should be like, oh, that's really interesting. Or, oh, I can see how that applies. Or wait, sell me a little bit more. And sometimes they do. You go to the next chapter, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. You answer my question, but sometimes they don't. And that's okay. Just because you write a book, and this is coming from a guy who's written 9 books, just because you've written a book doesn't mean you have all the answers, doesn't mean you're an expert. So that was the first time I kind of was like, is it really 10,000 hours? There's also a great TED Talk. I forget who did it, but if you search it, it's a pretty well-known one where somebody pointed out that it only takes about 20 hours to learn a new skill. And not to be a master at that new skill, but to learn a new skill. And yes, the 10,000 hours sounds really sexy and it's touted a lot, but do just a little bit of investigating whenever somebody brings that number up, because it's not quite as it seems. In fact, the researcher who first did the research to find out that 10,000 hour number is kind of, again, there's some iffiness around that. But that's okay. I don't think that takes away from anything in these books. And sometimes people think that, oh, if an expert is wrong, sometimes we should never listen to the expert or we should never listen to the author. That's not the case at all. Again, you should always be in dialogue with the books you're reading. David and Goliath, also a really fun book. It really talking about underdogs. And this is kind of a hard book to kind of coalesce into a single thought, but it's really the idea of looking at what we think are advantages, what we think are disadvantages, the stories we tell ourselves about, hey, I'm an underdog, I can't be successful. I'm a small business, I can't compete with the big dogs. Or conversely, we're the big dog in this place, in this context, in this market. For example, we don't have anything to worry about. And that's not quite the case. And so again, really diving in a little bit more to whether or not there is really some truth. I mean, he basically goes through, and the title of the book is The David and Goliath Story, and does some really interesting research and kind of brings some different threads together about, maybe David wasn't that much of an underdog in reality. So again, we sometimes describe advantages or disadvantages, fortune or misfortune incorrectly, right? It's just on the surface. So the power of diving in a little deeper is great. Malcolm also has another book out. Actually has two. One that I don't have yet, or I just never bought, but I read a lot of it. It was something about the dog's shoes. I forgot the title actually, but I'd actually read a lot of his past articles from like the New Yorker and some of his other stuff. And that's really what that book is, just a collection of them. I just don't have it yet. And then he has a new book out, which will be pretty interesting. It's called Talking to Strangers, and really looking at how we miscommunicate, how we make assumptions. And based on those assumptions, we don't communicate well. It destroys trust and leads to problems. I'm pretty fired up about that. Haven't had a chance to read it yet, but right up my wheelhouse, since I talk about empathy and trust building in the sales process a lot. By the way, he also has a podcast called Revisionist History. Super good podcast. Again, just looking at stories and going, what if we look at this a little differently? And I highly recommend it. He's, I think, got season 3 coming out, but he's got a couple of past seasons out already. So that's the summation of all of the books of his that I've read. What can we pull out of that? What are some ideas that we can pull? So I kind of mentioned a few of these in passing, but one is right now the idea of building your network. I think we're going to see moving forward the power of our relationships, power of our network, super critical. And it always has been, right? This isn't new. But what I do think we can look at is the idea of the connector, maven, and salesperson. Is asking yourself, like, am I connected to those 3 types of people? Especially if I want to share my message. If I want to become a sales Sherpa, if I want people to recognize me as an expert, you need to have those 3 people or 3 types of people in your network. You need to have some connectors. There's people that I know in my network who are just hardcore. They just know a lot of people for whatever reason. And a lot of my connections are through those kind of that smaller group, that subset. So get to know connectors. Mavens, make sure people who are experts in their field know you. So if you want people in your industry to know who you are, make sure the people that know a lot about the industry know who you are. And then salespeople, it's good to have fans. It's good to have people that can influence and sell to others be on your side. Right? So the idea of building some fans right now, super, super important. One overarching idea, one of those two, take your pick, idea that I think is really valuable is something that, again, he's just very good at, is to take a lot of complex ideas, and he's really good at telling stories and making them kind of like metaphors to help us understand the message he's trying to get. That's really, I think, a key part of what selling and influence is going to be moving forward. It's not about just the facts. It's not about just the data, because honestly, we can get that from a website, and technology is going to be better at sharing that. It really is helping share stories in a way that a person can get. They go, oh, that makes sense. And so that idea of metaphor, thinking about the stories that you're sharing with your prospects and customers as you're trying to get them to understand things, or even as employees or team members or colleagues. But that has actually been something I've found very valuable for me in my career. It's something I use a lot. For example, when I'm coaching clients, using stories help people see a message a little differently than they might have before. So think about the messages you're trying to share and go, hey, there's some metaphors that I can use to connect this more easily in people's mind. And then the other thing I would say too is looking at the broader context that you're going to be selling in. What disadvantages, and we're all a little freaked out because of the pandemic. So let's just look at terms of disadvantages. What are the disadvantages that you have in selling, in competing in the business place, and how can you make them advantages? I don't mean to be flippant about that, because it sounds like, oh yeah, that'd be great if I could make them advantages, they wouldn't be disadvantages. But sometimes it is a matter of just exploring that. I mean, one thing I talk to salespeople a lot about is the idea, figure out your biggest objection and brag about it. For example, if you're not the cheapest competitor in your marketplace, go, hey, we're not the cheapest. And that's great. Somebody who's selling luxury cars doesn't apologize for being expensive. They're like, damn right, we're expensive. And here's why. Or, if you're a smaller company selling against bigger competitors, instead of going, well, I know we're small, just be like, hey, we're agile, right? And that's a great thing. So again, looking at what could be perceived as a disadvantage and really crafting a message that shows, hey, this is really an advantage. So those are just a couple ways you can take some ideas from Malcolm, put them into your daily life. I think reading any three of these books would be great. If you had to start somewhere, I think I'd probably say Tipping Point. It's an older book, but it's still super good. And the other book I wanted to mention today too is there's an author, I've only got one of his books, Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational. Very, very much in he's actually a researcher and scientist, but he's really a master storyteller. Predictably Irrational, definitely about customer psychology, behavioral economics. Whew, that book alone, I could do a whole week just on some of the ideas from that. Maybe I will. But that's the other one that I want to kind of connect with Malcolm Gladwell, because again, a great author who's good at taking complex science and really telling a story and helping you understand how it can impact you. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for listening in. For all of you who are on the recording, appreciate it. As always, if there's anything I can do to be of service, please reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find a lot more information at my website, davidjpfisher.com. If you go to /blog, I've got hundreds of articles on networking, LinkedIn, social media, sales, marketing, professional developments, all kinds of good stuff. I'd really recommend you just surf through there a little bit. If you know any organization that's looking for a virtual speaker on sales, networking, professional development, or marketing topics, please have them reach out to me. Would appreciate any introduction since I'm not going to be speaking in front of audiences probably anytime soon. And as always, stay safe, stay sane. I know people are getting a little squirrely right now. Just do the best you can. And because this came up early in the stay-at-home orders, but we're not working from home right now. We're going through a public health crisis and maybe an economic crisis at home while trying to get some work done. So do the best you can. And as always, be patient, be kind, take care of one another. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye.